CPFA. I'll introduce John in just a moment. CPFA, California Part-Time Faculty Association. So again, I'm Sally Sanger. I'm a FAC board member and part-time faculty chair this year. I teach at Santa Barbara City College, both in the credit and non-credit divisions. And let me introduce John, the chair of the CPFA, and he has a couple things to say.
Yes, I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you, Sally. Good morning, everybody. Those who were not here yesterday, you missed out on some wonderful dialogue, but I believe that even today it would even be better. So I welcome you today, and it's going to be a short one. We'll be done by noon, so you have a chance to go walk on the beaches if you're closest to the beaches, or up in the foothills if you're close there. So let's make this a great ending. We got a lot to talk about. We got two great keynote speakers, and we're going to talk about the future. And from my vantage point, I think the real solution is in Sacramento and educate our legislators about what needs to be done. But we'll have fun talking about that. So anyway, I teach history. I'm at Duke College and Shasta College. Been at this front for the last 20 years. And so I look forward for today's events. Thank you, Sally.
Okay, thanks, John. So the Part-Time Faculty Symposium, is an annual event put together basically by the FAC Part-Time Faculty Committee. And it's specifically to address the needs of part-time faculty in the California Community College system. This year, the theme is good trouble in bad times. As the late John Lewis said, never, ever be afraid to get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So we are here to expound on that and help you towards that end. I do want to take a moment to thank the members of the committee, the Part-Time Faculty Committee, Dana, David, Deirdre, Laurel, Raymond, and Terry. Thank you for your help. I really appreciate your contribution and support to get this together. And to Lydia Stoyan, the Queen of Program Development at FAC, and Arnie Schoenberg. Thank you so much. He's the CPFA King of Everything Zoom. He's been instrumental in keeping this together. You guys are a formidable duo, and thank you for your work on the symposium. And I can't see everybody here, but I'm not sure if Debbie Klein is here. Is Debbie with, oh, there you are. Yep, you're just down below, a little bit below me. I want to introduce Debbie Klein. I don't want to put you on the spot, but she is our FAC president. Do you want to say something, Debbie, a quick word or two?
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, part-time committee. You're so mighty, and I'm so grateful for your leadership. And yeah, let's get in some good trouble. I wore the shirt, and the election today was called, so maybe that's a good sign of good things to come. So I'm looking forward to these next 3 hours.
Great, thanks, Debbie. Yes, we had a great session as John was saying yesterday, and I'm excited about our agenda today. It's very different. And so I'll briefly go over the logistics, and you saw the agenda, but briefly do that, and then we'll get right into it. So we have 3 sessions this morning, and each of them allows for a Q&A. So we'll have time for that. There'll be a short break after the second session. During these sessions, please have your microphones mute at all times. And our first speaker, Leticia Pastrana, she'll give her presentation with time for questions at the end of the session. But if I see something that is in the chat that needs to be said, she said that's fine to interrupt her at an opportune time. Now I want to introduce Leticia. She is a UC Riverside doctoral candidate in higher education, currently teaching at Imperial Valley College. And correct me if I'm wrong, so hopefully I got that right, Leticia. We're just meeting, actually seeing each other today. And we really appreciate you being part of this, Leticia. So her topic is what stakeholders get wrong about part-time faculty. So we'll be here about 5 hours, I think, with this. No, it is about 35 minutes for the presentation, and we'll have some time at the end. but it's up to Leticia.
Oh, Sally, you're muted.
Sally, you're still muted. There you are.
How long ago? Did I get
Not too
muted?
bad, but
You
we're
said
ready
it's
for
up to
Leticia.
Leticia to.
Oh. Well, okay, let me tell you, it's just up to Leticia to figure out how you want to divide up the time, but we'll go till about 5 minutes to 10 or so. And we'll, a little bit after, we have a little bit of time to come and go on that. So I'll let you expand on your background, Leticia, and welcome to the Part-Time Faculty Symposium.
Thank you, Sally. So that means I could get started?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Leticia Pastrana, and I teach English as a second language. I'm out in the desert, Imperial Valley College. I graduated last year from UC Riverside after 10 years. So yay, that's where I get the little doctor part. It's hard. And what my research really focused on was part-time faculty in community colleges. And you would think that'd be kind of strange for a full-time faculty member, but before I was full-time, I actually worked part-time in high schools and adult schools. And, you know, at one point before I got my full-time job, I was on state benefits and, you know, I had just had a baby and the food stamps. So that for me, it was just, you know, desperation for medical benefits. So I came out to the desert. It's 118 in the summer, but I have a full-time job. So all that to say that I bring a variety of hats to this discussion of part-time faculty issues. So my perspective as, you know, having been, you know, a temporary part-time worker, having been full-time, and then I had a short stint as a department chair. So that little experience in administration. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. It always takes me just a second, so bear with me, please. Does that work? Can you see my screen?
Looks great. Thanks, Leticia.
All right, so actually the title is What Academia and Administration Gets Wrong About Part-Time Faculty. And, oops, is that. And so today I want to explain how and why some of the arguments that are put forth are really they come from an area of misinformation and a lot of gaps of information about part-time faculty in order to help part-time faculty strengthen the arguments that are put forward for improving part-time faculty working conditions. So at the heart of everything is the budget. And if you take nothing away except for a few nuggets about funding, that would be fantastic. And so financing is the central component to everything that happens. And here in this chart, you know, you can see that we get funding for the community college from state and local revenue, from enrollment and other student fees, and from federal appropriation. In California, which is in orange, you know, follows the trend of the national trend of the majority of state and local funds making up the biggest portion of the budget. However, we are also seeing a national trend toward reducing the state and local funding and increasing student fees as the main source of community college budget funding. So in 20 states, these enrollment and student fees make up the bulk, the major source of funding, more than state and local. And in states such as Vermont and New Hampshire, 80% of the budget comes from enrollment and student fees. So there's a real shift away from this governmental support for community colleges. And as this shift happens, the money is changing. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding where the money is coming from. And this stems from a national shift that happened starting in the 1980s, in which the ideas of a free, open market, competitive market, where individuals can, make their abilities shine, in values of productivity and efficiency. So this narrative started in the 80s and continues into today. And out of this was the desire to reduce government spending on education. And within this context, full-time salaries are said to be an inefficient use of limited governmental resources. And of course, this connects to research, because what happens at the local level, at individual colleges and at the state, so like in California, where we have this system, the community college system, is that research is going to focus on what's happening and try to explain why it's happening and what are the outcomes of that. And then that's going to inform policy and administrators at the local level. So these two are really connected. So the focus is on economics. And as the budget streams change and there's a lot of uncertainty as to where the funding is coming from, college administrations have really relied on using part-time faculty as a way to save, to balance the budget on a yearly basis. However, I really need to explain that there are two types of part-time faculty. Of course, there's more, but for the purposes of this explanation, I want to say that there are vocational and academic faculty. And the vocational faculty is a faculty member who has these highly valuable and rare skills. And this type of faculty member typically has an easier time finding a full-time job outside of academia, and they typically do have a full-time job. And so their value to the college is really based on these skills, these valued skills. So they are valued for the skills they bring. In contrast, academic faculty is the faculty that teaches in the traditional transfer type of courses. And this faculty does not have very rare and highly valued skills, despite the fact that, of course, a master's degree is necessary and they are qualified. This faculty group has less of a chance to get full-time employment outside of academia. And so typically this faculty group relies on their academic income as the main source of their income. And this is the faculty group who really represent an economic value for administration. So the academic part-time faculty represents an economic value, but no educational value to the college. And this is due to a scarcity mindset that has really come out of this shift in budget and allocation of resources. So scarcity is a psychological state in which you feel you have less than what you need. And when you have less than what you need, you tend to focus on immediate issues and you kind of ignore the long-term issues. So you can't see the forest for the trees. Administrators are so busy every year trying to balance the budget. And in California, we have the May revise, in which monies that were essentially promised in October may not actually be given to the college, which might have already spent that money. In the situation of COVID now, my institution the state is doing a 5-month deferral, and we are going to be down $11.1 million from the state. And although they've promised to give that in this next fiscal year, I don't know that the chances of that really happening are realistic. And so the budget does consume the eye of the administrators. It's what they see in front of them. And the long-term picture is really fuzzy. So scarcity mindset. And so this scarcity mindset is combined with how colleges get their money. So we count success in community colleges by the number of students who complete a degree or certificate. Now, this has been problematic because 72% of students who must take 2 or more developmental courses do not earn any type of credential. Now, I know AB 705 was instituted to try to change that, but nevertheless, this is the information that we have. And so administrators are, and state stakeholders are responding to this and saying, how can we graduate more students? As educators, we know that the goal of education is not always a degree, but definitely that is what gets counted. And so we have things like performance-based funded that get instituted that really are, we can understand an outcome of this scarcity mindset, because they're instituted to try to improve student retention and gains in the short term, but really they have these negative effects in the long term. So the goals of performance-based funding, which was recently instituted in California, although we are still in hold harmless, was to improve graduation, retention, associate degree, and certificate completion. So this was the goal. But in the research that has come out of other states that have implemented performance-based funding, is that there really is no improvement, and that for underrepresented students, access to the community college gets restricted. And in fact, there is some short-term gains in short-term certificate production, which the authors of these studies note are taught by faculty who have only a bachelor's degrees, because they're a modification of certificates. They're shorter term certificates. So there's an increase in the use of part-time faculty who are paid even less than, I guess, the typical part-time faculty member in academic areas. And then there's also a decline in academic standards. So this example really shows that although the goal is to improve education, because we're so focused on getting monies through performance-based funding based on the number of students who complete a degree or certificate, we're really ignoring these long-term negative impacts that go contrary to what our goal actually is. Another example of the scarcity mindset then is the way work is structured for part-time faculty in community colleges. And in fact, that part-time work is an involuntary choice. In California in 2017, 83% of new faculty positions that were reported to the chancellor's office, so California Community College Chancellor's Office Data Mart, were part-time, and 17% of the positions that were created were full-time. And this mirrors the national trend in which the composition at community colleges is 83% part-time and 17% full-time. So what academia gets wrong? So based on this understanding of a scarcity mindset and the role of the budget, I'd like to talk about some of the gaps and incorrect assumptions that exist in the literature and which are used to fight back against the arguments that part-time faculty have made to improve the exploitation that they work under. So this includes a scarcity mindset, actor-observer bias, the lack of data that we have and dated information, an over-reliance on surveys, a deficit view of part-time faculty, and an implicit bias. Now I'm going to explain each of these briefly, but I understand it's a lot of information, so I hope I don't overwhelm you.
Leticia,
Yes.
before you go on, if you don't mind, because this came up a little while ago, can you explain, somebody asked, can you explain short-term certificate? Someone is not familiar with what you mean by short-term certificate.
So typically we have associate's degree, and forgive me for not remembering the number. I believe it's 60 units. I may be wrong for for an associate's degree. And then within that, you might find, and I think it varies depending on the area, a certificate. You might get a certificate in that same, for example, criminal justice, within that same area, but based on fewer number of courses. But what's happening is there's more, I suppose, vocational short-term certificates. And because on the vocational side, the qualifications differ. A lot of time there's equivalency that can be achieved not through education, but through experience. And because pay tends to be, the salary schedules tend to be based on education, the fact that faculty in these areas have, less education, they get placed lower on these salary schedules. And so we're producing these shorter term certificates that are taught by faculty who are paid even less. I can give you some of these studies down here. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Great. Okay. A couple of people have made comments in the chat too to help answer. So thank you, Leticia. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Because what happens is colleges want that money based on certificate completion. So they're creating certificates that are even shorter because that ensures more students are going to complete it because there's fewer units.
It could even be in non-credit too. Is that right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So jump ahead. So actor observer bias theory. So there is this wonderful book called Whistling Vivaldi, and it talks about why minority students don't do so well once they get to these universities, despite the fact that they've done so well in college and on the SATs. And Claude Steele, the author, points to this actor-observer bias theory. And I've found that it explains so much about what happens in research and how we sometimes talk past each other when we're at the bargaining table. So I would like to explain this to you. Actor-observer bias theory says that in a given situation, there is an actor and an observer. And for the actor, the person in the situation, behavior is always described based on the environment, on what's happening, on the context. So teachers would say, what are you going to teach? It depends. It depends if the students did the work. It depends on how well they understand the context. Concept being taught. It depends. For an observer who doesn't understand the context, the actor consumes their point of view. All they can see is the actor, the person doing it. And so instead of looking at and taking into consideration what's happening in the environment, they tend to focus on the individual. And they say, okay, behavior is due to these characteristics of these types of people. So for example, students, we describe behavior, we ascribe behavior to students based on what they do. We say, you know, they're not motivated, they're not engaged, versus looking at the environment. So to give you an example, I have this lovely Zoom, and actually I couldn't find a picture with no Zoom faces on there, because that's actually what I often face, is this black screen full of black little boxes and everybody is muted. And I teach speaking and listening. So at some point students need to speak. And so what happened at the beginning is that I tended, as an observer, I tended to ascribe this behavior due to student disinterest. They're not motivated. They're probably sleeping. They're playing their games. They're on, you know, social media. They're anything but present for my class. So because I was an observer. And one day I asked the students to do a glamorous dress up day. And, you know, everybody would do their makeup and their hair and dress up so that they would, you know, feel comfortable sharing their screen. And in the middle of class at this particular day, one of my students, she's very beautiful, her hair and her makeup, and she ran out screaming, "No!" And she ran out of the picture, and she came back, and her hair was messed up, and she was, you know, and what happened was her 3-year-old son had grabbed a pair of scissors, and so she had to race over there. So as an observer, I'm ignorant of these things, but the actor, the student, is going to tell you, I turn off my camera because I'm sharing a space, because I have to help my children. There's such a wide variety of reasons that they would turn off their camera, but just for me observing, I'm focused on their behavior through their characteristics. That's how I explain it. Does that I think hopefully explain it? Because I'll come back to, oh yes.
There is a question about that. Well, two things. Could you repeat the name of the book that you
Yeah.
referred to? And someone asked, does actor bias impact part-timers more at faculty evaluations or hiring interviews?
Definitely, because unless you are part of that group, you don't understand the context. So full-time faculty member doesn't understand that a part-time faculty member is working part-time because they have to, not because they want to, because 83% of the jobs being offered are part-time. They say individual behavior is because of individual characteristics. That person wants to teach part-time. You know, it was a dream of theirs. So definitely this does color a lot of the areas of part-time faculty, research, life, experience. Yes. And the name of the book was Whistling Vivaldi.
Thank you.
Claude Steele, Steel. So another deficiency of academic research on part-time faculty is that there is just such a lack of data. There used to be a national survey, the IPEDS, that collected information about the numbers of full-time and part-time faculty across different institutions of higher education. So not just community college, but across the gamut. They also collected information about pay, about satisfaction, just a variety of indicators and factors. But as of 2004, that was no longer funded. So although there continues to be collection nationwide of full-time faculty numbers and full-time faculty pay, we don't have that same information for part-time faculty. And in 2012, the Coalition for the Academic Workforce attempted to collect data on a national scale, but that information is reported more anecdotally in the research that has come out from it. And we do in California have the Chancellor's Data Mart available to us. However, that data is not transparent. We have to kind of sift through it, and there's just a lack of analysis. So someone might go, like me, to the data mart to look for the one thing they're looking for and take that out. But to my knowledge, there's just not systematic analysis of that data, except for by specific actors for a specific purpose. And because we have this lack of current knowledge, what academics are working with is very dated knowledge. So for example, there is a 2007 study that found that part-time faculty earned 64% less per hour than their full-time counterparts. And this was based on 1999 data. And yet, because we have no current data, that figure continues to be used in the current literature. And, you know, it's like the old cell phone and the new cell phone. There's so many different things, you know, there's still cell phones, but we don't know if has it stayed the same, has it gotten worse, has it gotten better? We don't know. And another limitation of the literature is this over-reliance on survey methods versus observation of actual classroom practice and interviews of faculty, getting their firsthand experience in the classroom. So there's actually a lot that researchers don't know about the community college and its faculty and part-time faculty, like what they actually do in the classroom, what their job entails. They say teach, and teaching is somehow comprehensive of many things that go beyond the classroom. For example, preparation and grading and working with students, but that's not well understood. And within this research, we can understand that actor-observer bias, because with a checklist, researchers are really focusing on the individual. Does the individual do this versus what's happening in the environment that would lead this individual to take this course of action? So let me give you an example, because this colors so much of the literature on the outcomes of part-time faculty on student learning. So we have an entire body of literature that says learner-centered pedagogy works for students and teacher-centered doesn't. And I don't think anyone can really argue with that, and we all know about that. But there's an assumption that learner-centered pedagogy would lead to improved engagement. So if you use this technique, it will increase student engagement and learning. Check the survey. However, few studies, because I found like 4 where they actually go into the classroom, community college, to observe what's happening. They found that, yes, there are teachers using these techniques, but they're using them in a way that is teacher-centered, so they don't function to create student learning and engagement. But that's missed in the surveys. And so most studies on part-time faculty, and okay, I got to speed it up. So most studies on part-time faculty find that faculty have a negative impact on student learning. So there's a pretty sizable body of literature that shows retention and graduation rates are negatively impacted, and that transfer rates decline as the proportion of part-time faculty increase. And so there's this deficit view of part-time faculty that frames the literature. I do need to point out that researchers do say that these negative outcomes don't come out because part-timers are not qualified, but due to their lack of resources. But in my estimation, this part gets missed in the research because it's kind of like a small footnote in the larger article. So there is a negative researcher bias. And this is my last point, and then I'll get to a discussion. There's a negative researcher bias, and this bias is actually not just by researchers, it's by administrators, by full-time faculty, by legislators, by the general public. And this is that there exists an implicit assumption that contingent, temporary, part-time employment will lead the workers to reduce their performance, so not work as hard, in order to minimize the inequity of their employment. Now, this would explain why, and please forgive me, but when I started this research, I would ask, why do part-time faculty do so much work? Because they were describing all of these hours, unpaid hours. Why would they do it without pay? And that shows the assumption that someone who is not getting paid would not do it and not do it well. And in my research, I've had part-time faculty who tell me it's not only full-time faculty who ask, it's also administrators, it's also board members who ask this question. And it's very, very insulting, because I understand now through my research that part-time faculty do this work because they want the best education for their students, and it's not about pay. And so, and it's not about ensuring you get the next employment for the next semester. That's not it at all. It's because your identity as a professor, fulfilling who you are as a person, that work leads to fulfillment and getting students the best education. But there is this bias in a lot of the research. Now, it's problematic because the literature in sociology has found that the opposite is true. So what I found, sociology has found as well, but educational researchers are not looking at this body of literature. So there's just many gaps and incorrect assumptions due to the points that I have very briefly described, and they're complicated issues. So please forgive me for overloading you on a Saturday morning. As a consequence, so we have the scarcity mindset. We're looking at all these things, we're ignoring the long-term solutions. Is hiring so many part-time faculty a cost savings, or is it a cost shifting? We know that there's this growing class of managers in community colleges, and they don't generate FTES, which generates revenue. They don't do that. So where does their funding come from? And at my institution, because of COVID, we have a hiring freeze. And in ESL, we have 3 full-time positions that we lost within this last year or two due to death and retirement. And we're canceling classes left and right. However, at the same time that there's a hiring freeze, this semester, my college has hired 3, well, they adopted 3 new managerial positions and are hiring. And there's no discussion for faculty in that. I opened up my email one day and it was, congratulations to this person on this new position. Welcome them to the college. And when you look at the board meetings, the agenda, one line says approval of this position, and the next line says approval to hire this person for this position. So there's a lot of betrayal. It's not just part-time faculty, it happens to full-time faculty too. And so we have just little scholarship on what is the efficiency and effectiveness. We think we're saving money, but student success rates show that we might be doing a detriment to our students. And of course we are when we don't pay faculty to grade and prepare their classes and to meet with students. And we need a long-term solution to the yearly budgetary issues that confront administrators. You know, administrators have this real challenge year to year to year, but there's really nothing that points to any long-term solutions. And so part-time faculty have become that de facto long-term solution. In my opinion, the argument that needs to be made needs to center on providing students with the best education. The Cal State system adjuncts use this to great gains. They said student learning conditions are faculty working conditions. They have pay parity. full-time faculty can't take courses overload, and they really use this to their benefit. And here in California, we've used this argument to gain some headway for paid office hours. We need to provide students access to faculty. Office hours should be paid. So this argument does work. But what happens is this argument kind of falls by the wayside. We need allies. Part-time faculty need allies. Students are a wonderful avenue. Through my research, many faculty said that they don't feel comfortable telling their students that it's not an appropriate place, the classroom, and that students are already struggling so greatly. But within this national context, because part-time employment is not just in the community college, it's the whole economy, the gig economy, if you want to call it. That's what's facing our students. And you know, this idea of when the plane's going down, you have to put on your own oxygen mask to be able to help anyone else. And if we really want to help our students, prepare them for, you know, a better life, then I feel that it's important that we do engage students in this conversation to a greater extent than we already have. And we need full-time faculty members also to be allies, because full-time faculty members, when we fight for limited resources, again, it's all about the budget. Resources are very limited. I'll speak for one more minute. And when we say faculty are greedy, that destroys our argument that we should be paying part-time faculty parity with full-time faculty. So if we want parity, we can't also say they make too much, because that means that why should someone give you more money if they're making too much? We should just take away money from them, but not give it to a part-timer. So there's some issues there. And also that kind of alienates full-time faculty from maybe wanting to be involved. And the issue is not the full-time faculty members. It's really the cost of benefits that are driving costs and lower governmental resources that have been supplanted by student increase in student fees. And it's not directly tied to the salary, but to benefits. And, you know, faculty are not the only people on campus who get benefits. There's also administrators and classified. So we have to look at the picture. You know, we need language around the situation for part-time faculty. Driving to 6 colleges and having your office be your trunk is hard. We need to educate full-time faculty. You know, part-time counselors and librarians, because they're able to get paid per hour they interact with students. I interviewed one counselor, part-time counselor who worked at 3 institutions. She was making $80,000. These conversations need to be had, because then I interviewed another young gal who was at 6 institutions making $44,000 a year. The disparity is great. And we need people to disaggregate the data that we have. We can use the California Public Records Act to request information from our institutions. And really, we need to focus on changing that California Ed Code that exempts us from other labor laws that would protect our hourly, our work. So thank you.
Oh, Leticia, thank you. That was just so informative. A couple of questions in the chat, and then we can open it up too. So, and in fact, those participants, if you have a question, do the little, instead of waving your hand, because I can't see it all.
Jeff Johnson and Rick both have questions.
Okay, good. Let me just do one from the great comments in the chat too. And Leticia, I apologize, because I guess I should be calling you Dr. Pastrana. So my apologies for not addressing you correctly. But Debbie, our Debbie Klein from FACC president asked if you have had a chance or have you shared your information and research with the chancellor's office.
No, I am a single mom, and in my full-time work and, you know, finishing up the doctorate, my son went off the rails, you know. So I call him my velociraptor. As soon as I look away, he's jumping the fence. So that's kind of been challenging. I haven't, but it's something that I need to do.
Okay, let's see. Arnie, you probably saw it first. So why don't you let us know?
Jeff Johnson, Rick Baum, and then John Gofsky.
Okay, thanks. Let's go ahead, Jeff. Make sure you're unmuted.
You're muted, Jeff.
I thought I'd unmuted. Yeah, the question I wanted to ask was with regard to the issue of trying to do some kind of research. I've been trying to approach the Rossiter School of Education at USC because they've shown an interest in doing work on this. And I think the thing that you're getting at here is that one of the things we need to do is we need to do proper research in terms of how we look at the issue of adjunct contingent faculty. And I'm kind of wondering what recommendations you would have for doing some kind of a serious research project, which could then in turn be something that we might present in like, say, a reporting bill to the legislature or something of that nature.
Well, thank you, Jeff. You bring up two really important points. And one is, I believe, I could be wrong, the USC, the Rossiter School of Education, has opened up a PhD in higher ed. I don't think it's community college, but they fund you for 4 years. They fully fund you. So if you can get into that program, you've got it made. And what really we need is we need California community college faculty members doing research. There is practitioner research, but what happens is that higher education university scholars don't take this literature into consideration because it's not in peer-reviewed articles. So all of that literature that we have that we're producing is invisible, and so it's not counted. So we need more people who are in the community college who understand the context to produce more research that's in peer-reviewed articles.
Thank you.
And Dr. Pastrana, somebody asked, name that program again that is fully funded before we go on to the next question.
Well, I know there's a program and it's in LA, and I'm pretty sure it's at USC. I'd have to look through my emails, but I saw it not too long ago and I was jealous because, you know, I have 190,000 in school loans now because I took 10 years at a UC. It was not fully funded.
No.
Yeah, I was going to maybe give a little information on that. I mentioned the Rossiter Institute because in the past they've offered up to $15,000 grants to do that kind of research. And I've met several other adjuncts that have gone on and gotten their PhDs looking into studies like that. I could actually mention two names, Bobby Lee Smart, Jessica Posey. But you know, that's the thing. I'm just kind of wondering, okay, if we can get somebody in there who's doing the research, what are the things that we need to be looking at so that we get at a lot of the stuff behind the implicit bias?
There's a lot of stuff that we need to look at. So what we actually need is to connect these people who have that higher education, and not that a master's, there's anything wrong with it. It's just the snobbery of academia. Is you have to have that, you know, and those titles, and, you know, an EDD, maybe if it's from UCLA, but that's a whole different conversation.
And Arnie did put in the chat, he put a link to that. So thank you, Jeff, for mentioning it. Now I think it's Rick and then John after that. I don't know if I got those mixed up, but Rick and then John.
Thanks. I just want to make a couple comments and have you respond to it. I mean, one of the problems in California is that the K through 12 schools are terribly underfunded. And so the students coming out of those schools that end up in the community colleges are ill-prepared to do college level work. So they don't have a foundation to begin with. Secondly, what I didn't hear you talking about is social class, because especially in urban areas, the students attending community colleges are mainly from the working class and lower middle class. And our society doesn't give a crap about those types of folks. They only see them there to get job training, and they don't, and when there aren't jobs, they care even less about them. So I would like you to discuss, who it is, the types of students that we have coming from the working class. Like I'm at City College of San Francisco, where not only are they from the working class and lower middle class, they're predominantly students of color. And they're taking away their educational opportunities right now. So what's happening at my college, I'm sure elsewhere, is reinforcing structural racism. And this is being done by administrators who I see as our enemy, and boards who themselves are often people of color, reinforcing this type of depriving students of educational opportunities. So I know that's a lot, but I'd like to respond to that because I just didn't hear you talking about social class at all.
Right. So, we have to admit, or we have to acknowledge that our K-12 system is fundamentally a racist system. I mean, that's how it was started, and that's how it really continues to be. Higher education, not just K-12, but our education system in the United States. And this book by Claude Steele, I really like this because he talks about why minority students don't do so well. And he talks about stereotype threat, and it's really, really interesting. But again, we have that insight, actor observer bias going on, because we need to work to understand the context. So we can't just say students are unprepared. We have to look at what's going on instead of blaming individual types of students to really get to solutions or things that are really going to connect to students to help them out. Context needs to be more important as a focus of research. It can't be the individual. It has to be the context and the interaction between the teachers and the students, for example, in the classroom. And well, I think that might answer the other thing, and then I'll go on to the next question, is that we need more articulation with the high school. So along the lines where we need to understand context better, community colleges, and in California, there is funding and there is work being done to articulate better with the high schools to ensure a more seamless transition, so that that point of the pipeline where students get lost is kind of shored up. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we have a couple more minutes left, and we'll go to John. But briefly, I just want to ask you, Leticia, are you okay sharing your slides with us? Or, okay, we can send it out to the.
If anybody wants to read my dissertation, you'd be one of a select few people, but I could share.
Yes, no, thank you. This has been so informative. And John, you'll be our last question, and we have to move on.
Oh, thank you. Hi, that was great. Thank you for your presentation and your research. I really enjoyed it. And so I have a question based on mindset, because I can see you really are focusing on mindset. To me, it seems that there's a mindset in academia that the situation we're in is some kind of aberration, that the full-time, part-time ratio will change at some point in the future. In other words, that the jobs are coming back. And quite frankly, I don't believe that at all. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been at where somebody stands up and says, yeah, the problem is we need more full-time hires. Yeah, that's what we need. That's what we're going to focus on. We've focused on that for 40 or 50 years with no change at all in that ratio. And so I don't ever see us getting to 75-25 or whatever the golden ratio is when the unicorns fly over and poop full-time jobs on all of us. I just don't see that happening. But I think there's a mindset that is somehow going to happen. And I don't see any research or data to support that our industry is any different than any other industry in terms of the casualization of labor, and that the structural changes are somewhat permanent. And we have a permanent underclass in our industry. And so I think the mindset that somehow that's not the reality, and somehow the reality is that things are going to change, things are going to improve, we're going to get more funding, we're going to get more full-time jobs. That mindset, which to me is false, affects how we look at the whole issue, full and part-time faculty, and stops progress from being made. Because if we don't accept that we're in a stable situation, we can avoid thinking about the problem in a different way. If we see that where we're at in 75-25, and that ratio that we're at, which is nowhere near that, is fairly permanent, at least for the foreseeable future, my lifetime at least, then if that reality stares us in the face, our mindset has to change a little, because then it becomes less acceptable. And I think it's acceptable because we think it's an aberration. And I think that mindset really affects us, in effect, more than the mindsets that you've identified. I think, to me, that's one of the main mindset issues and I don't see anybody looking at that or talking about that, because it's not easy to think about that our situation is permanent. So I wonder if you could comment on that. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. As you were, to me, that does speak of a scarcity mindset, because it's really having less than what you need. Your focus is just kind of wonky. For example, in my department, we have 7 full-time faculty. We used to have 14 just a few years ago, and we're fighting for 3, but we're going to be happy to get 1 or 2. So we're losing this long-term longevity. And, as you were speaking, I was reminded of the frog in the hot water, or the lobster. You start turning up the water slowly, and they don't even realize they're in such hot water. And part of the issue is we have a lack of data. We don't know numbers. We don't know, that information is not readily available, and so not readily known by faculty. It's like,
I actually am not. I think everybody knows that we're not making any progress in this ratio. I think that's a reality, and I don't think it's lack of data in that sense. I think it's not confronting what the data we know is, that this is a stasis system. This is not changing, and no matter what we do, it's not changing. And I just think that it affects the way we approach the issue. I don't think people accept the reality that our structural changes in this education industry are permanent. I don't think we're confronting that reality. I don't think steelworkers do either, but I think we know a little more, so.
And part of that is this point right here. We need language around underemployment. Part-time work is really an involuntary choice. And we have language around being employed and being unemployed. But what happens in this middle ground? We don't have so much language to describe that. With COVID now, people are able to articulate, yeah, I have 3 jobs and I still can't make it. So on the national conscience, that's kind of becoming more to the forefront of people's minds. But before that, we just had no way to really articulate some of these things. So I don't disagree with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions and good interaction. And there's a great chat going on too. And if you don't know how to save the chat, if anybody wants to save the chat, because there's a lot of information in there, just click on it. And there's these 3 little dots you can barely see, and you click on that and it lets you save the chat, because there's a lot going on there too. So
can I say one last thing?
Sure.
My institution is hiring for a couple of administrators and one full-time classified position. So if you go on the website, there's anyway, nobody wants, there are few people that want to come out to the desert, but that's why we have a little bit more full-time positions here than somewhere more urban. Thank you.
Good tip. Thanks for sharing that. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your participation in this. And let's move right along. Let's see. So again, you might have already had your microphone turned off, but microphone's off, please. We're going to get into our next session, and it'll be similar format. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Questions can be asked in the chat, but we're hoping we can get to those questions at the end, and we'll present as many as possible to the speakers at the end of the presentation. So one of the benefits, did I get interrupted? Okay. One of the benefits of online events like this one is the opportunity to bring in speakers from anywhere without the inconvenience and expense of travel. And our next 2 speakers fit right into that category. We're honored to have with us Jack Longmate, retired faculty at Olympic College in Washington State, and Frank Cosco, Vice President and Chief Chief Bargainer at Vancouver Community College Faculty Association. And I will let them expand on their background, but we're welcome to Frank and Jack, and I'm going to turn it over to you. We have about 40 minutes or so for this session. And this is the Vancouver Model for Equity, what it is and how to get some. So Jack and Frank, you're on.
Frank, shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I'm not from Vancouver. I'm from Washington State, but I am sort of an evangelist for the Vancouver model. I believe it offers a solution to contingency and the two-tiered system, and I believe it is something that symposiums like this should hold up as something to really consider. I'm going to try to briefly touch on 4 features of the Vancouver model. Arnie has put together a set of resources. I'm not quite sure how to get there, but there's one of the first ones is a listing that Frank has assembled that lists a number of the features. I'm going to talk about 4 of them here. I will say that when I first heard about the Vancouver model, I had some real problems because these workplace provisions seem so foreign to my understanding of reality. I had trouble accepting them, and I had trouble believing that they could possibly apply here in the United States. I believe they have full applicability though, and part of the reason is because the forces that drive contingency here, which we talked about, Leticia talked about some of them, I believe they exist also in Canada. What I think is really unique is that the Faculty Association of Vancouver Community College has taken its role of its duty of fair representation seriously, and it's really gone out and defended its members, all of its members, especially those that are most vulnerable. It's done this, and it's also taken its duty to defend faculty rights seriously through by means of calling strikes every so often and also calling for strike votes. Let me just plug this. I think the most authoritative discussion of this is Frank's chapter in this book by Keith Fuller. This book is mentioned as one of the resources on the listing that Arnie has assembled. Basic to understanding the Vancouver model, the key difference between faculty is not part-time and full-time, as I think it is in most institutions here in the US, but it's the distinction between regular or permanent and term or probationary faculty. That's the key distinction. The first feature I'd like to talk about is the 100% prorated pay. At VCC, or Vancouver Community College, all faculty, whether they're full-time or part-time, whether they're permanent or temporary, are paid according to the same multi-step salary schedule. If you happen to work 60% full-time, you get 60% of the pay, and that's that. There is no secondary discounted pay. Now, you might wonder, do part-time faculty have to do things like office hours? And the answer is yes. It works in this way. Each of the teaching areas at VCC, and there's over 40 of them, have democratically developed a workload profile that allocates hours and instructional and non-instructional duties. Part-time faculty assigned to those departments are expected to fulfill all of those duties, but on a prorated basis. That is, if a full-timer is expected to have 5 office hours per week, a part-timer at 60% would have 3 office hours per week. This system has been in place at VCC since 1992. They've figured it out and it works. A second feature is job security through regularization. When most faculty are first hired, they're hired as term or probationary employees, but then they become regularized. And once they become regularized, they can pretty much assume that they're able to keep their position until their voluntary retirement. Colleges may lay off regular faculty, but they do so, they have to show just cause, and the union is apt to grieve the layoff. Regularized instructors are granted the right of first refusal, which is those individuals who are part-time are given the chance to take on additional classes up to 100% full-time. And this is the way most full-timers become full-time, is by upping their load to that point. At VCC, there is no workload cap that no more than 67% of full-time as adjuncts in California face. But also at VCC, it's not just regularized instructors that have the right of first refusal. Term faculty who have taught for 6 months also are granted that right, which I think testifies to the great work the Faculty Association has done. Regular part-time instructors are further granted the right of accrual or a regular time status, meaning that if they're at 50% or 75%, they're essentially assured of that workload on an ongoing basis. And regular part-time instructors can remain part-time if they wish. That is, there's no real penalty for remaining. Now, regularization is not tenure, but I hope you'll agree that it is solid job security, and I think it should be seen as a solution for contingency. The third feature I'd like to mention is the pathway, the conversion from term or probationary to regular status. This provision varies at different colleges, but at VCC, it's automatic. An instructor who's taught at 50% of full time for 2 years, or technically for 19 months out of any 24-month period, and assuming no negative performance reviews, is automatically converted from term to regular status. For those of us in the US accustomed to the precarious employment that we have for decades as adjuncts, this may seem too good to be true. But you know, when you think about it, it's nothing too extraordinary. Most any professional job, when a person starts, they go through a probationary period, and then they become full-time, or that is, they become permanent, and they can assume their job will continue. Well, that's the way it is at VCC. Now, some might argue that US higher education's treatment of non-tenured instructors is a violation of human rights and human dignity. And one of the documents that is posted on the list of resources about this talk is entitled COCAL Proposal to End Contingency. That document attempts to make that argument. And a fourth feature I'd like to touch on, and like the others, a great one, is there's a meaningful seniority system at VCC. From their first day of hire, all instructors begin to accrue seniority. And seniority is the primary, though not the sole, basis for a class assignment, workload assignment. Seniority's standing is maintained by an entirely transparent method. And also on that set of resources, Frank has extracted a portion of this, the seniority listing of nursing personnel, and you can kind of see how it works by examining that. The update is, the seniority listing is updated daily, and it enables any instructor to see how they stand relative to other instructors across the institution or within their division. Like, that is, if you're a nursing instructor, you can see how you stand seniority ranking wise with other members by glancing at that list. Seniority is maintained through service days, and VCC presumes 261 service days a year. So if you work a year as a full-timer, you get that much. If you are a term or probationary instructor, you accrue seniority on a prorated basis. That is, if you teach 60% of a full-time load, you get 60% of 261 days per year. I don't know if I made clear, but this seniority system is comprehensive of all faculty, full-time and part-time. It's not just tenured or full-time, or it's not just part-time, but it's across all faculty. Full-time regular instructors who work full-time will get 261 days. Part-time regular instructors will also get 261 days of seniority per year. Why might that be if they're not teaching full-time? Well, the provision is to protect their seniority ranking. It's okay for them to remain part-time if they choose, but they won't be overtaken by someone else who might have taught more. They're in this way, remaining part-time is a choice they have, which I think is a great thing, especially for people who have things like maybe other careers or family responsibilities. They don't have to make a choice between taking care of their family and stepping away from their professional status as an instructor. Now, of these 4 workplace provisions that I've talked about, compensation does require it makes a budget impact, but the others does not. You don't need a budget increase to extend job security. Setting up a seniority system may involve some effort, but no legislative appropriation, which is most certainly important these days because, as everyone here knows, all our governments are broke. We can't expect new funding for new things. However, that in the case of contingent faculty, there's so much that remains to be done that shouldn't stop us from going forward. In fact, it might even be an advantage because now we might have sort of a reset. I liked some of John's concerns at the prior session that, is the situation permanent? Well, now might be the time to raise up some values of equality and say, now it's time to change. In 2010, Frank Cosco and I developed the Program for Change as our best shot as a roadmap about how the workplace provisions of VCC could be imported into campuses here in the US. The Program for Change includes the 4 things I've mentioned, plus about 30 others, most of which require no funding. It reckons with the fact that when change happens, it often does not happen at one time, but it may take several bargaining sessions or several legislative sessions for it to come about. And Frank and I have made our best attempt at trying to identify steps that could be taken. And we were making our best guess at those, but if you were to take a look at it, I hope you'll use those guesses as maybe ways to help you do some strategic planning about how to bring about some of these things in your location. I think it is important to keep in mind that one transcending goal, which I think Vancouver Community College exemplifies, and that is equality. And maybe it's time also for those who are defending the status quo to think, hey, no, we can't change. This is the way it is. Maybe they have the burden of proof to defend why the status quo is legitimate and why we can't have equity. I think now is the time to raise it. And if there is one value that higher education should be espousing, it should be equality for all. Well, that concludes what I'd like to say. Well, so now I'd like to turn it over to Frank.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me, I hope?
Sounds great.
Thanks very much, Jack, for doing that. And it's great to see faces from a couple of years ago when I spoke to the CPFA, John and Arnie and David, and I heard Carol a couple of times. It's good to reconnect and through the wonders of Zoom. Like Jack said, we've left documents with Arnie and others should folks want to share and look at them closer. And I put my email on the in the chat. I'm happy to communicate with folks if that's needed. And Keith's great book that Jack referenced has a good description there as well. I attended a bit yesterday and I was really glad I did. I'm very impressed with the knowledge and experience and sophistication of this group. It was quite enlightening and I appreciated the opportunity. And Leticia's talk this morning was very interesting as well. The whole question of outcomes never comes up in BC and VCC because we just expect that there's like a seamless whole between what you guys call part-timers and full-timers, and as Jack said, our regulars and non-regulars, that we never question things that way on outcomes. But anyway, that was interesting. So my part of this little presentation is how to get some. And as I'm really worried about the time constraints, so I just tried to stick to maybe 3 main points that will reflect my union experience into VCCFA, the Vancouver Community College Faculty Association. And what I've got so far are make sure your own house is in order, mobilize your power, and be steadfast and strategic. So I'll try to touch on those 3 points. And I'm really looking forward to some questions. So on the make sure your own house is in order point, I'm going to posit that full-timers in our profession of post-secondary educator don't have enough professionalism yet. There should be a single tier. There should be only one job. This part-time, full-time divide is a distinction without a significant difference. Real professionals, and you can look at any professional group, look after their own. No self-respecting professional is going to let compensation and working standards of their newest members undermine the integrity of their whole project. So a profession wants its members respected and compensated as well as possible and treated fairly. And I think that's lacking amongst too many full-timers. But I think it's there, and I want to touch on that later. Where there are unions, and I come from a union house that was filled with the classic cronyism that is always in the movies. When I started, members should act within the best democratic union culture, and that involves fairness and raising up the least served, the least powerful. And when I say members should act that way, that applies to all members, no matter their time status, rank, and whether or not they're in leadership. Another point is that leaders are important. You've seen that in your recent election. They need to challenge their members with agendas of fairness and show their members that they have thought through strategies with reasonable risks. But you have to have some risk in your agendas. Looking at that dire situation and the great descriptions I heard about it yesterday, that absolutely demands those kind of agendas. And you should demand that from your leaders. And we have to stop treating our own so poorly, within our own groupings. And I'm talking about unions and associations here, sometimes creating irrational bylaws and restrictions on members, whether it's a part-time union or a wall-to-wall union. And where these exist, so those have to be changed. They have to stop doing this to ourselves. In our union, it's kind of ironic. I often hear that we need a part-timers and non-regulars in executives and stuff. For 30, 40 years, we've never had that. We've never had dedicated spots for these people. Our union leaders, who are mostly full-time, are charged with that responsibility because they're union leaders, not because they're full-time. And that's what union leaders are supposed to be doing. So, so I want to move on to my second point, which was mobilizing your power. And here's where there have to be full-timers who care, and even better, full-timers who care about the profession. And even better, there's full-timers who care about the profession and who are real unionists. So we got to seek out those type of people and support them. And that's what happened at VCCFA. The non-regulars of the day, the part-timers, didn't lead this battle at the VCCFA. Full-timers did, righteous full-timers. And if you're in a part-time unit, work with full-timer units who do care. It's really tough for the part-timers to be the spear point because they're the most vulnerable in your association. When you have the kind of great self-representing organizations like, I don't know how to pronounce it, FACC, I guess, and CPFA, but which are weaker themselves compared to big unions, et cetera, they have to seek out more powerful allies, whether in the union movement or government or students or other unions. And I saw that today, yesterday and today, and that's what you seek to do. So that's good. Now on bargaining, and here's my favorite plank. It's about power and leverage. And to me, the primary historical lever of the labor movement is the strike and the strike vote. Over our 30 years, we've had 13 rounds of bargaining. We've had 6 strike votes in those 13 rounds, and 3 of them led to strikes. But they've gotten shorter, 5 weeks, 2 days, 2 hours. A strike doesn't have to be an all-out damn the torpedoes and we're never coming back kind of situation. You can have very sophisticated strategies once you start using these levers. And sometimes the strike vote itself is enough of a lever. Mobilizing our power has to mean actually using the tools we have internally with prepping members, building them up in every way, respecting their roles, keeping the context for decisions in front of them. You don't just ask for strikes cold on a February morning just because it's February. You have to build up a context for asking these kind of questions of your members. And externally, vis-a-vis our other competitors and our other potential allies, it means not being isolated. Rick mentioned yesterday the San Francisco strike. And to me, that was a pretty isolated thing. And it was perhaps easy for government to pick them off. And believe me, even here up in BC, I don't want to go. There was a day when we could go on strike by ourselves and take action. But nowadays, we have to be more sophisticated about that. And the management side has organized itself. So we have to look at how to develop coordinated job action projects. They don't have to be strikes. There's a lot of stuff up to and including strikes. So, but I always tell rookie bargainers, it really gets real when you have a strike vote. So, and that all reinforces your lobbying as well. Once government knows that you're serious in these ways, strong bargaining reinforces our lobbying efforts because we always do that as well. And my last point was to be steadfast and strategic. It's going to take time. There's no quick fixes. Even in Vancouver, we have the advantage of a strong union culture. We take strike votes occasionally, but we've had unsuccessful rounds where essentially no rights were gained. So keep your eye and efforts on the long game. I heard a lot of good commentary yesterday on redefining the profession the way you want it to exist. This crazy quilt haphazard practice where people are hired into poverty and narrowly defined precarity needs to end. The profession needs to define itself and value all its work. Its scholarly activity, its teaching, its institutional service. There's no magic about any of that. And we should be defining it, not letting it be defined by our opponents. As you do, I come from the community college world. It's a great American invention, which we thank you for. I heard one of your poet laureates say it's the greatest invention since the bicycle. But I never understand why so many times we import the dysfunctional stratification of the university into our community college world. Get rid of stratification. Community colleges are about opportunity and fairness and chances for students. Why not for faculty? How many times did I hear yesterday, I've been an adjunct for 20 years. And here's an Italian word which should become an English word, basta. Basta is a great word. It means enough, no more. We got to remake the workplace. We got to normalize it, as Jack was saying. This is just talking about normal work, and that's the way it should become. We reject the zero-sum game, and leaders need to be selling this. When bargaining, I call it having cookies for all. All the segments of the union, the student to retire, the department leader types, the governance types, the mid-career folks, the new ones, the ones who need benefits, all need to see themselves in the union agenda. So we always bargain that way. We never bargain just one part of the agenda. And we have to be realistic. We have to be strategic. Will governments have money to spend? Is this round better to go for rights instead of money? Job security, the right to reappointment is key. And I heard this said yesterday a few times. And as Jack said this morning and others have said, it doesn't have to cost much, But that's why management will really dig in on it, because they don't want to give up flexibility.
Yeah.
That's more important to them than cost sometimes. So our basic approach in Vancouver has been to erase as much as possible the divide between what we call regulars and non-regulars. And if there's a money issue, sometimes you can amortize it over many years, even beyond a short collective agreement. You're not going to be able to solve these problems in short agreements. Improving, and we have our transition mechanisms, as Jack was saying, so our our non-regulars have a clear path as soon as they're hired. At VCC, we say you're only hired once in your career. That's it. You start as a sub maybe, but that's it. You can retire, whatever. Anyway, given COVID, it was mentioned yesterday, I think society needs a reinvestment, a grand human infrastructure project. And I think governments like your government in California and now your new national government will listen to that kind of advocacy. Work with everyone to turn the crisis into an opportunity. Reverse the shock doctrine that's been used on us. Now we've all got a shock, let's use it to better society. Sure, maybe there's no new money for a while, but then in return, let's work together and give job security for all. Reasonable workload so we can contribute to our institutions with one and only work at one or one of them, for Christ's sake, instead of 6. Anyway, I'll stop there. I'd love to take some questions. Thank you, Jack.
Yes, thank you, Frank and Jack. Well, very enlightening. I'm sure. In fact, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just put the Vancouver model on here because we knew that a lot of people wouldn't know what that was. And this has been really helpful, even though I'm a bit familiar with it. So thank you so much. I think I'm moving to Canada. We do have a few chats, and then go ahead and go to the participants and raise your hand on the, because I can't see physical hands. I think Arnie will help me, but if you have a question or a comment, doesn't have to be a question. But David had a couple of comments in there. Number one is, how full-time salaries compare in California to Vancouver VCC.
Yeah, we've just bargained a new collective agreement. It's a provincial scale, the whole province. Top of scale will round out at 100,000 Canadian next year, in a year from now.
I'm sorry, it will round out, it'll top out, did you say, or?
Yeah, 100,000. Okay.
I don't know what the exchange rate is. What is that
well,
about?
That's about 80,000 American, I guess. But,
okay.
we don't have to spend 80,000 American to live. It's very, very comparable. Life in Seattle and life in Vancouver is very comparable.
Okay. And if we know we need to get full-timers on board, how do you do that? Do you have any concrete suggestions?
Well, that's what I was trying to say. You have to find full-timers who will lead on this and will see that their profession is threatened. And they do exist. I think you can find them. You've got great history, great ideas in California and other places. And you have these examples, and people should run for leadership positions based on these agendas, ending this disparity. And as was said yesterday, it's destroying the integrity of the post-secondary educator profession. So you get those people to lead, not people who are just worried about their pensions.
Just to append a little bit to that, that question was asked of Frank at a conference that Keith Holler organized at Green River Community College. The question was, well, how did you get full-timers to go along with it? And Frank's answer then was, well, because it was the right thing to do.
And also yes, it is the right thing to do, and people will respond to that fairness message. You don't stand up at a VCCFA meeting and say anything against equity for all. Nobody's done that in 20 years. And when you're bargained, you have cookies for everybody. There's something in the game for them too. We don't have one-sided bargaining agendas in our union.
I think Scott had a question. Scott Douglas.
Does that mean I can jump in here? Frank, it's good to see you again. I met you a couple of years ago. Couple of a comment and a question. The observation of, talking about getting full-timers involved, and you said, they exist. Well, our first speaker here is a wonderful example. Leticia is a full-timer, and she's been a part-time friend and advocate for a long, long time, and she's not
And she's in ESL like I am. They're always the best people.
Well, my question is, we've debated, and I've been doing this for years and years and years, and there's always a debate, two really important issues: equal pay and job security. And there's always a dichotomy of about half the folks thinks one is the priority and the other half thinks the other is the priority. And I wondered if you had an opinion in that regard, and I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I favor the job security. Then once you've got some job security, and our term people have some job security after 6 months at any time status, then you feel a little more confident about advocating for your pay. And the pay disparity in the States is so crazy, you're never going to solve that quickly, in my view. And it's got to be amortized over a long time. So getting the job security first, to me, would be the priority. And that fairness will change your whole nature of your institutional life once people feel part of the institution. By the way, what wasn't said is that we have overtime bans on everybody. Nobody works over 100%, regulars or non-regulars. So that shares the work more. So there's work to be shared.
And if I can follow up with one final tidbit, I don't want to take too much of other people's time, but if job security is the key, one of the things that we encounter here, and I think it's a prevalent, not thought through position that a lot of adjuncts have fallen for, I hope that's not too strong a language, is the idea that, well, we can't give you job security because that would mean that you must make more money that we don't have in the budget. And I contest that. I don't think that's accurate at all. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, we delink those two. We don't make that. Job security can be free. Mm-hmm. And in my bargaining history, I have found that management will fight they will actually fight job security harder than they will fight salary. Because they think buying off people and keeping them precarious is of more value to the other side.
In my
experience.
In my book, there's an article by Don Aaron, The Case for Instructor Tenure. And basically, he argues for something called tenure in place. And what that means is that after someone is taught a certain number of years and they've had normal reviews, not extra large reviews, they should get tenure. At colleges and universities, four-year colleges, et cetera, that'd be 7 years, and they should have tenure automatically. As we know, everything that we talk about is within the two-tier system. And this is like talking about everything within the slave and the non-slave system. And then we try to attack everything from a particular item, but there's like 1,000 items that we have to attack. And in the meantime, we don't keep our eye on the fact that the full-timers, who are usually in control of our unions, are also bargaining things for themselves. So if we get a small raise, it may be meaningless if, unbeknownst to most of the part-timers, the full-timers are getting annual raises that we don't get, for example, which is typical here in Washington State. And so every time I'll never forget someone, our union president, who happened to be a part-timer who sold us out, announced that he bargained 3 days of personal leave, 1 a quarter, for the faculty. And I stood up and I said, "Congratulations, that's fantastic." He said, "Oh, no, that only applies to full-timers. It doesn't apply to part-timers." And I should have asked, but my next question was, what did you give up for the part-timers to get that leave for the full-timers? And so somehow or other, we've got to get outside this. And I came in late to the last session, but the AFT nationally has for 15 years now been trying to get legislatures to spend more money to get more full-timers who are not us. In other words, they want to do the 75 full-time, 25% ratio part-time. And they pushed this bill costing $200 million in our legislature last year, and Jack and I and others defeated it. But essentially what they want to do is they want to spend money to essentially hire more full-timers, not promote us. And so every time there's a new full-timer, at least 1 or 2 part-timers will lose their jobs because they don't create new jobs. They take courses from us to create these new positions. And then I don't see Carol here, but I'm told she's here. Then when an overload is taken by the new full-timer, a potential 3rd adjunct could lose their jobs. So this idea that we need more full-timers is all within the 2-track system. And they give a kind of a sop that they're going to do something about part-time salaries, which they never do. But in fact, this concentration that AFT did on more full-timers is the logic goes, well, the full-timers are treated better. So if we get more full-timers, we'll have more people treated better.
Yes, Keith, thank you. And thank you for the book that I haven't read yet. So there, again, information in the chat about a lot of what we're talking about and references to that. I see Claire has her hand up, and we're running just in time because we're running close on our time here. So Claire, you're up if you still have a question. I see your little hand up there.
It's mostly a comment.
Okay.
There's a question attached. I really love this model. You know, we've been in this struggle for a while where in our local union and at our college, and it's a great relief. I breathe a lot easier listening to this model. So I appreciate it. And I was thinking also that because the non-instructional duties are proportional, that means that adjuncts or part-timers are really involved in governance work, and that seems like a real plus to any institution. So I just wanted to make that comment. I'm curious about those non-instructional duties, but we don't have to talk about them right now.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
Well, what's interesting too is what John Gofsky brought up too, that it kind of aligns with this. Like, we were not moving forward in changing the numbers, so to speak. So let's make the conditions better. Let's bring it up. Let's have this, get rid of that 2-tier system, which may also get rid of the incentive for, you know, having so many part-time faculty and putting the loads on us without fair compensation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move forward in our next part of our schedule, which actually is a break. And again, I'll remind you that as a PE teacher, I strongly encourage that you get up and move around a little bit. But what happened yesterday is a lot of people didn't get up and move around. They stayed during the break and chatted with each other. So we are not prohibiting that at all, but I'm going to get up and move around. I'm hoping that either Lydia or somebody else can keep an eye on things here. I think John Martin might be still here. So we have, let's see, I'm looking at my schedule, 10:40 to 10:50, about a 10-minute break, enough for get a cup of coffee or again, go for a quick jog outside. And we'll come back for our next session, which will be bringing it all together, legislative update, creating positive change through good trouble. So have a nice break. I'm going to take a little break myself and I'll be back, but you're welcome to keep chatting.